episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you love underground music and movies, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed shirts, vinyl, CDs, and more. Go to portlanddistro.com. Plug in the discount code MikeHill666 for 15% off at portlanddistro.com.
Steph, it's great hearing from you again, man. It's been a while, and I just wanted to catch up with you, man, see what's going on.
Oh, back in New York, getting back into it. Things are opening, and the record's out. Also, I guess today is 9/11, so a lot of people are in my thoughts for sure. And, being a New Yorker, born and raised here.
Absolutely, man. It's, 9/11 was such a heavy thing nationally, but specifically if you are a New Yorker, to have experienced that on a daily basis and it just being in front of you all the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I live and work in New York City. So, and back then I was living in Long Beach, but I was, commuting in every day. And it was, Long Beach is a lot of NYPD, fire department. So our community certainly felt it for sure. And my family actually worked in that building, and they were actually not in the building that day, luckily. So, yeah, and it affected all of us, right? And we felt a wave everywhere. So big respect to, all the people that helped and joined together, and everyone. New Yorkers definitely stuck together during that moment in time, for sure. And here we are 2 decades later.
It's crazy to think that so much time has passed, because I remember, I was working in New Jersey and commuting to Brooklyn every day. And I remember being at work, sitting in the office, and, someone mentioned something about being a crash into the World Trade Center. And, back in the 90s, another plane had actually crashed into the World Trade Center. And I was like, I wonder what's going on here. Then when the second one happened, that's when it was like, okay, this is some shit going on. And then from there, history was being made, very dark history, dark moment in history. And I feel like the United States has never been the same since then.
Yeah, a lot of things changed. People who are growing up, I mean, listen, I'm in my 50s, right? So people who are younger, it's just a page in history to them. They didn't really get to live it. And they didn't realize what it was like to go onto a subway and see military people with, military armor on and machine guns standing in Union Square. And we were on edge for a long time after that. It took those wounds a long time to heal. But, everything changed when we went onto a plane. They take our shoes off. Everything really changed after that. If you grew up with that, with taking your shoes off, it was normal life for you. But if you remember before and then you remember after, things certainly changed.
Yeah, I remember taking flights prior to that, and it was just literally no security. You just basically walked onto the plane, and of course they checked your tickets and everything, but there wasn't like this homeland security efforts like they have these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The interesting thing about 9/11 too is that I felt for the first time in history, it seemed like people actually had come together a little bit. You know what I mean? Like in New York City, I felt like there wasn't as much tension. There wasn't like as much. Like people were cooperating more, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
And which was diametrically the opposite happened during the pandemic, where it just became polarized. And if you were wearing a mask, you were this type of person. If you weren't, you were,
Right.
Personal freedom and all this. Like everyone became Patrick Henry,
Yeah.
Give me liberty or give me death. You know what I mean? And it's just like this really weird narrative about freedom and all this stuff erupted instead of people being like, all right, we're all in danger, we're all at risk at this unknown threat. We don't know what the parameters of this thing are, and let's just kind of, be there for each other. But that really isn't what happened in New York or anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, it was a weird time for a lot of people. It changed the way we looked at everything, and we realized that we live in the United States where, we take sometimes things for granted, our safety for one. And then all of a sudden we were looking over our shoulder everywhere. We weren't really so sure where things were going to go. And it definitely changed us. I also grew up in New York when it was kind of a shithole too. So I was always kind of looking over my shoulder. But this was different. This was like a different thing than just like, street crime or something like that. This was a different level of it. And it affected everyone throughout. We started looking everywhere. Our whole infrastructure changed and where we were. And I remember not wanting to be on a subway car or a bus or, necessarily in isolated areas where I felt like I was possibly in danger. And then, like I said, a lot of my friends and family are all NYPD and fire department and stuff. And I was hearing, the recovery, Voss lives down in that area. She lived in Tribeca back then. So, all my friends everyone was living on the Lower East Side and downtown, and things were closed off. It was an unusual time. It was a very unusual time. But anyway, my respect to that time period and all the people that were lost. And hopefully, today will be a day. I know they're going to have a lot of people speaking and stuff. And hopefully it'll be a positive environment and people will learn from our history moving forward.
Yeah. And not be selective about what they want to see in the news or in history or, built to create any other false narratives that might be out there or weird conspiracies about stuff. That's what I really hope people get back to, finding the truth instead of supporting false narratives and conspiracies. And I've been guilty of that too, man. Like I used to love reading about conspiracy theories and all this stuff, the JFK assassination, the moon landing, but it was all fun back then. And now it's turned into actual violence against people. And that's a real tragedy in my opinion.
Yeah. I would like to see a little more unity today amongst everyone. So yeah, I've been guilty of the same things myself.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that was then. This is now. We'll move forward. Hopefully, we've learned from the past, and gives us a better path to the future.
Exactly, man. And for anyone out there who was listening to Metal Matters, the podcast I was hosting for Gimme Radio, you guys might remember, Steph. I did a series of episodes actually on the Goden record, which came out. Was that 2020 or 2019?
2019,
right? Because it was the one of the top 40 for Decibel in 2019, and I think you and I started. We talked about that in 2020, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think was it number 10? I think Decibel, maybe.
Yeah, it was really high on the list.
Yeah, we made the top 10, I think.
Yeah, it was really impressive, man. And so if we haven't listened to that episode of Metal Matters or that series of episodes, go back and check it out. I talked to Steph, I talked to Tony, and I talked to Voss. And of course, those are the three primary members of Goden. And if you haven't listened to that record, first of all, I don't know what the fuck's wrong with you, because that's one of my favorite albums of the last 5 years probably. And you would know that if you were listening to Metal Matters, because you guys were in our list too. And I just want to reconnect with Steph and talk about a bunch of stuff, because that's not the only stuff that he's involved in. And for those old heads out there, you might remember Winter, which is another band, another legendary New York doom band, or sludge, doom, punk, crust, whatever you want to call it. Influential band. A lot of people reference them. If you're a fan of Evoken, you would probably really, really appreciate the music that Steph has done in both Winter and Goden.
Thank you.
Man. So, have you been working on any music? I mean, I know like touring and live shows are just starting to come around now. So during this downtime period, have you been working on anything new?
We keeping it moving. That was a lot of work to do that record, so I need to take a little break after it was kind of done. But we're probably on like a third or fourth song at this point now, and starting to write some new concepts for the next record. And it's been, we've been doing, a lot of us, like everybody else, have been kind of collaborating in more of like a remote kind of way, just sending ideas and stuff back and forth to each other. And then we plan to just track everything the old school way, like we did the first record, but collaborating has been being done more in a remote kind of way, which is fine.
Yeah,
you do what you have to do.
That's the way it seems to be done these days. And how have you been finding that process?
Well, I'm a little bit of like a geek when it comes to equipment and recording and so on. I kind of like it. I like being in my own studio. It's like my own little cave. I have all my toys there, amps and different things that I use to record. And I don't mind that process at all. I mean, I've been doing it for like 20 years that way. And I like it. I have no issues with it.
It's something I started doing the last few years, even before the pandemic, was because nowadays you have all these tools at your disposal, all these like plugins and amp modelers and, loop packages and stuff, which for most of my life, that stuff was first of all, kind of hard to navigate. And secondly, completely alien to me, because I was like, oh, I have a drummer. Why don't I just go down to the practice space and bash out a bunch of ideas? But with Tombs, like several years ago, we became a little bit more decentralized, and everyone kind of lived in different areas. So I learned how to use all this stuff, and that's pretty much the way to go these days. And there's a pretty like, there really isn't much of a learning curve anymore with using all these modelers and everything. If you know how to put a reverb into a channel, you know how to use an amp modeler these days.
Yeah, I mean, I was really fortunate. My brother's a recording engineer, and he's like a legitimate engineer. And I kind of, when he would have interns at his studio back in the probably 90s, he would have like interns, and they'd learn how to use patch bays, how MIDI worked, and how to put different things on different MIDI channels, and how to trigger samples and stuff. And when he would have those classes, I would kind of bring like a notebook, and I would write things down. And I kind of learned from him. He was pretty much taught me how to use it. And I started using Digital Performer back then because that's what he used. Because Digital Performer back in the day was really advanced in the MIDI part of it.
Right.
And my brother's studio was more electronica, and he did a lot of the Liquid Sky records that came out with like all the people like Soul Slinger, DJ Spooky, and a lot of the drum and bass stuff that was coming out of New York. And so MIDI was really important back then. And he taught me how to use. I used to walk around on be on the subway with a Yamaha QY70, which was like a little like drum machine kind of thing, and it had channels where you could make sections. And I actually made a demo in 2003 where I kind of like programmed the drums and then played everything and recorded it. And it was very primitive, and I would bring that to rehearsals when Winter tried to redo things in 2003 and be like, hey, these are some songs I have. And, they were primitive, and, I would say to the drummer, hey, I'm not a drummer, but this is kind of what the feel I'm going for, the tempo. These are the sections. This is how I kind of orchestrated it, and that's how I would use it. It would be like a template for me. And then as things became more advanced, I slowly indoctrinated some of the other technologies that were available. I also live in New York, so I couldn't be cranking amplifiers and stuff in an apartment, so I became really accustomed to using a lot of the Line 6 stuff at the time, like the Pod XTs, and later on the HDs, and then eventually some of the later plug-in type of things, as well as I always kept all of my original equipment from the Winter days, and it's actually still set up at Tony's. So I still use all the old stuff, and I use the new stuff. And I know that we spoke about the recording process, and I think records are going to get better from here on out, now that musicians have more control over the end product, and it actually giving the power back to the artist. So when I did the Winter album, when I did the Thorn album, we needed a little bit of a budget and money so that we can go into a studio and record. And we were recording to like Ampex, like, what was it, 496? I can't remember what those tapes were.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
So
wow.
So that's what Winter recorded to. I mean, that was 1989. We recorded that. The demo tape was recorded to the same type of tape. The Thorn album was all tape. So when things switched over and I had my brother's guidance, I kind of looked at it as like, wow, this is freedom. You mean I could record and do all this on my own and basically have like a pretty finished product? This is powerful. I need to do this. So I saw the writing on the wall a long time ago, and I embraced it. And I'm glad that I did back then. And that was kind of the process. But today I basically record all the guitars, bass, dry. I reamp things to, real amplifiers. I love the triple Rex and different amplifiers. And I also could use that dry track. I can go into a plugin. I can send it back out to my pods. And, I just use like basically what most recording engineers use, like a radial reamp or, a J, what is that? The J86.
Yeah.
Just to send things in and out of the computer so I could have control later when I'm mixing. Sometimes you don't want to necessarily, like the old days, you track something and then you go to mix it and you're like, this doesn't really sit in the mix the way I thought it would. It sounded really big when it was by itself, but now with everything else, it doesn't really work the same. So being able to reamp things really gave a lot of flexibility. And I like that process. I think it's great. And I think I'm hearing a lot of, like the Serpentine Path record, that was kind of an eye-opener of a bunch of younger guys, younger than me. And Jay was also has engineering background. And I mean, that album was recorded in Jay's basement. And, we used Pro Tools, a couple of interfaces, and everyone did their thing. And that record sounds pretty pro as far as I'm concerned.
I think it sounds great, man. Actually, we recorded two songs in Jay's basement. We recorded 2 Samhain covers there. We did Mother of Mercy and Kiss of Steel down there. And I was like, this actually sounds pretty legit for like a basement recording. You know what I mean?
Yep. Use good recording principles and you can make a pretty pro album if you follow some of the basics. For me, the drums were complicated because drums, you got tuning of drums, you got mic placement, and a lot of other things. So my brother was more helpful because he's a recording engineer. But yeah, I mean, Jay did a great job with that. I mean, he works at SIR and he's around a lot of engineers and sound, and I think he has a little bit of a recording background. I'm not sure if he did a little formal recording training as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely good at it for sure.
I think Sanford Parker was a little bit of a mentor to him as well too. And Sanford's great as well. He did a lot of great records too.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because Unearthly Trance recorded most of their records with Sanford, I believe.
Sanford was going to ultimately be the person. Was one of the people I had in my thoughts to mix the record. Ultimately went with Roy Mayorga.
Right.
But Sanford was definitely in my top few people. And anyway.
Yeah, Sanford's great, man. We did not Monarchy of Shadows, All Empires Fall, that EP. He recorded and mixed that record for us, and he's top-notch guy, like a great dude to record with. The funny thing is, like, we're talking about that tape. For any of you kids out there who haven't experienced the analog recording world, you might spend over $1,000 on just recording media if you were going to make a record. Like you would literally spend like $1,200 on tape to make a full-length record.
100%.
Nowadays, $1,200 might be your total recording budget.
Yeah, really. I mean, $1,200, you could buy yourself a really nice Focusrite Scarlett, a couple of microphones, a couple of things, and you basically have stuff to start your recording process. That's why I feel this new medium is so powerful for artists. They don't have to borrow money from record labels anymore. They could make their own record. They could lay out all their own artwork. They can make a finished product, and then they could shop that to labels and not really have to have this big recoup that we all used to have back in the day that most record labels say that you never made the recoup, So, I mean, the Thorn record was recorded at Electric Ladyland, and we had Roadrunner gave us a pretty nice budget to do that record. And man, if I had that budget now, I forget about what I could probably do. But actually, more money wouldn't really made a better record. And the other thing is, we got caught in that whole circle of, are we ever going to recoup this? Yeah, great. We recorded Electric Ladyland. It was nice to see the murals on the wall that Jimi Hendrix looked at. And it's nice to be in the A room and to be in there. But ultimately, it would never recovered from the recording budget. And that happened with a lot of artists. So doing this the way it is now and being able to put your videos and to put your music up on YouTube and to get it out there, it's completely different for the younger artists. And I think it's great. I don't have any of I don't think I would ever want to go back. We spoke about this once before. I don't think I would ever want to go back to recording in that way, to tape. I have had drummers all the time say, yeah, but you get the tape compression. And I'm like, come on, man, really? I mean, the editing and the amount of flexibility that we could do now, for the little bit of tape compression that you're talking about and the technology we have now, I don't think it really makes a difference anymore to go to tape. I don't get it.
Yeah, I know, man. The thing that always cracks me up about it is like people read that and they just kind of repeat it, without actually like. I think that you would have to have like an extremely high-end hi-fi system to really even know the difference between digital and analog. And I certainly don't have a system of that quality to make these statements, to make any kind of assessment about that,
Oh yeah, I'm like have like my high end is shot with the tinnitus and the hearing loss. I wouldn't hear that shit anyway, to be honest with you. And I don't really hear I think, listen, man, you could take a track now and you really have a lot of artistic creativity that you could do with tracks now too, especially with drums. I mean, on some of the new stuff we're doing, we're literally using V drums. And we're triggering our own drum sounds that we made, as well as other, there's plugins like Steve Slate and Studio Drummer and whatever. You could really fine tune and really develop your sound. And there are things you could do with instruments now to really give them a lot more balls and just make them really kick ass a lot more than they did anyway in the past. And you could do it in your bedroom. So I'm all for it. I'm all for the new process for sure.
I remember the days of recording drums on tape, man, and how fucking nerve-wracking it was, because it was just like nowadays there's all sorts of punching. You can punch in and, you got the click track going and you can really dial your performances in. But back then it was like the only way you could really I think the tape machine was one of those Otari, I think, made a tape machine where you could punch in with like extreme accuracy. And that you had to have like some completely unaffordable tape machine to be able to do that, and it just made like the endless, you had to play the entire song as a drummer, basically exactly the way you wanted it to sound. Like you couldn't punch in like a guitar player could back in the old days, and it's like that you would take days and days and days of getting just fucking drum performances and, and like, well, I guess that's going to be it, man. I guess this is what we're going to live with, and that's kind of how it is. And now it's like, you can edit drums, you can cut things out, you can, do all this stuff. And as I'm saying this, I'm sure there's somebody out there like well, that's all cheating, man. That's like, I go,
what's cheating about it, though?
Recording is cheating. I mean, recording is not live. I mean, when you see a band live, that's a completely different environment than just even the most old school analog recording methods,
100%.
Yeah. So it's, but it's a lot of fun, man. It's a lot of fun doing all this digital stuff, and you got so much freedom and there's options out there that just weren't available.
One of the reasons I chose, since we're talking about drums, one of the main reasons Roy Mayorga became my number one choice. For one, he's a drummer, and he's a phenomenal drummer. And he also, when working with him in Thorn, I also realized what a good ear he had as an engineer. Roy did live sound at Wetlands. He did live sound at CBGB's, and he did that for years. And he really knew how to fine tune and make things sound heavy. He just knew that. It's innately in his own personal playing, and he's a pretty astute drummer. So when we recorded the Goden record, we recorded in Tony's basement. I bought old school drums, and there was like a Pearl set, MXL, it was maple, it was a gold double kick, 2 kick drums, and we put it all together, we recorded it. My brother tracked it, but we had some confines of doing in Tony's basement, drop ceiling, not necessarily, sound bouncing all over the place, a lot of mic bleeding. Wasn't a professional recording studio, so to say. When Roy went to mix it, he called me up and he's like, Steph, the performances are great. I don't have a problem with that, but there's some cymbal stuff that's not, I know you guys have like drop ceilings. You sent me pictures of where you recorded. And he's like, there's just sound stuff that the environment that you recorded in is just not as far from proper. And it wasn't. It was in someone's basement, with like a linoleum floor. I mean, it was, we did what we had. We wanted the flexibility to record when we wanted to record over a 5-year period and leave microphones set up. So we had to trade off certain things, right? Here we have someone, Tony's going to leave his home to us to use to record, but it's not a recording studio. So Roy was able to go in there, and with the technology we have now, he's like, we were able to, sound replace a couple of different elements here and there. If anyone says that's cheating, I mean, how is that cheating? The performance is still there. It's still the drummer playing it. It's just that the kick drum might have sounded like a box. You know what I mean? Because of the way it was recorded or whatever it may be. So you're taking the performance of what the drummer's doing. It's just you're going to use maybe or add to that sound or add something else to it. That is part of the creative part of being able to record now. You can make things really monstrous now. And that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create something new. So with artists being able to use this technology, they're able to do that. They're able to enhance the sonic, record that they're giving you. And to be honest with you, it gives you way more flexibility as an artist than you've ever had before. It gives all the power back, but it does have its downside, right? You're recording home, guitar is one thing, but drums, completely different thing. You're talking about an analog instrument that, I couldn't sit behind a drum kit and tune it up properly, just saying, don't know how to do it. So yeah, some of those things were an issue. Going forward after doing that, realizing, because I originally said to Roy, oh, come on, man, we spent so much time. I don't want to do that. And he's like, trust me, I have to do it. The record won't sound consistent. If we just let it fly the way it is, you have 3 different drummers on the album. They're all using different snare drums. They're all using different cymbals. They're all using the same toms. They're using the same kit with the same mics on it, but they're all playing different. Those different drums, snare drums, cymbals. I have to unify some of it so that when you go from one track to the next track, it doesn't sound completely different.
Yeah, it sound like a mixtape instead of an album,
Right. You need it to sound consistent.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's really important if you want the record to sound professional. And I know that that's what you're looking for a record. And I wanted a very specific sound. So going forward, I realized after that, it was a big wake up call for me. So I had one drummer living in Colorado, one drummer living in Oakland, one living in New York. And then the pandemic started. And I says, we need to find a solution because we're not going to be able to sit in Tony's basement.
Well, actually, before you go on, can you tell me can you tell us who those 3 drummers were?
Yes, absolutely. So I have, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should always mention everybody. I try to remember everyone. We have Vic Pullen, we have Jason Franz, and we have Scott Wino. So those 3 drummers, I got everyone together. And I said, listen, we got to do this differently. Jason said, why don't we consider using the V drums? We'll make our own proprietary kit that we like, right? So we made a kit with Vic and Jason, specifically, those 2 put their heads together. And with me, we kind of said, this is the type of kit I would like to have, at least somewhat close to it. Because when you hear a certain sound, it makes you feel a certain way, which also makes you play a certain way.
Absolutely.
So the drums have to sound a certain way. I mean, I'm not going to play like a 60s jazz kit and then try to play heavy music. It's just not going to work. So we made a kit that would sound as monstrous as we wanted it to be, and then we use that as like part of our skeleton. And now every time we do a new song, Vic has that kit that we made. Jason has that kit. So when everyone is sending stuff, we're all like you, and we're all using the same drum software. Vic has a TD50, I think, and I think Jason has an older V drum kit. You know, MIDI to USB adapter, plugs it into his laptop, goes right into one of those drumming sequence programs.
Right.
And I'm the host, right? So they send me MIDI track. I add it to my sequence and the tempo, and we work from there. Every time we update something, I just make a new take, and they send me a new drum line. I'm like, I don't really like the way it's going into the verse or the chorus. When we do a different fill there, they send me a new string track of the MIDI with any type of edits, which is what I would do in a rehearsal anyway, right?
Yeah.
If I was with a drummer, this is not like when people say cheating, I go, how is it cheating? I would be doing this in a rehearsal. Hey, Vic, that fill you do before you go into the bridge or whatever, give me something like this. But now I call him up on the phone and say, hey, I got your thing. I'm listening to it. In verse 2, can you do this thing? He goes, oh, yeah, sure. He plays it. He sends it back to me as if he was, in the studio at his own leisure, at his own time, with the proprietary kit. So I think going forward, it's probably going to be more like that. I know that like the Slipknot drummer, he uses V drums, and a lot of younger guys are using that new kit that looks like it's a V drum kit, but it looks like a real drum kit.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know about that. Yeah.
I think the Slipknot guy, I can't remember his name, but I think he's endorsed. I think he literally uses that live now. And there's a new kit. I can't remember the name of it. If you go to Roland's site, it literally looks like a drum kit. You can't tell that the only thing that looks different is there's like black symbols on it. And I look at that and I go, that's probably one of the coolest innovations moving forward for drummers. They have so much flexibility to have different sounds and to manipulate it that they could create something new. If you have one drum kit, you have one sound. If you have, a set of V drums or whatever type of drums you want to use, you have thousands of sounds that are completely editable. The same way everything else we talked about. If we have a plugin, if we have pods or different amp modelers, it's the same thing. If you look at my pods, I have 20 different proprietary sounds that I just sat there and geeked out for hours on end, and I would save those patches. So there's something about that from a creative standpoint that makes it easier and more creative going forward. So I just embraced it for that. And I use some of the old school methods too. So that being said, as far as the recording process, I'm totally open to it.
Yeah, it's a really good time, man. You have so many options. You could do old school stuff and incorporate that. And I agree, man. And I got to be honest, over the last 5 years, I think that I have embraced more the idea of creating a whole other world for the listener, as opposed to we're in a rock band and this is what we sound like in a room. You know what I mean? I kind of gave up that aesthetic of making records, and the new concept is this is a world that you're entering, and it's a complete illusion, really, this illusionary world that you're immersing yourself in, and we're using whatever sort of resources we have to create this world and the experience of the listener. And that's kind of suits me and the band and all the applications and resources that are out there, And it's like you were commenting earlier about, before we started recording, how you like the guitar tone on what was it, The Hunger, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like I told you, that was a direct guitar, reamped. There was most of that is a 5150 through an actual head, and then there's a little bit of a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier in there, but it was tracked dry, just with direct signals. I mean, we were running a model as just monitoring, so it didn't sound like a like a ukulele or something like that when you're tracking it.
Right.
But it's all created within the box, and we're flying in some real sounds from the material world, and but it's all an illusion, really, you know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Trying to create new sounds. I mean, look at hip hop music. There was nothing real about it, and all of us love great hip hop records.
Sure.
I mean, they get hats off to them. You know, I mean, most of the music was derived from like funk music, James Brown, and Graham Central Station, or whoever it might have been, but they literally embraced it, and it's one of the biggest music forms in the world, right? We embrace it, we took it in, and that's going to happen to heavy music. It has already happened. Everyone is recording it this way. When I went to Roadburn, I think it was 2013. It was the year that Triptychon played.
Right.
And I was backstage, and I was speaking with the guitar player from Triptychon. I forgot his name, but we were talking about the recording process. And he was saying that they used Cubase and how they were recording. And I was like, "Whoa, we're doing it like the same way," And I was like, and he's like, "Yeah, he's basically a recording engineer." And he says, "That's how we did the whole record." And I think those records sound phenomenal.
Yeah, they're crushing, man. They sound great.
They sound totally, and they're doing that. And I mean, everyone's kind of doing it that way. So, but yeah, we're looking for new ways to express ourselves. So embrace it. Can't fight the technology.
Also,
sure.
We kind of touched on this a little bit, but some of your custom guitars, man, like you got a bunch of cool like guitars that you use too.
So we spoke about some of the guitar stuff. Something to say before we get into those guitars. We talk about the old school. Right now, you could go to Guitar Center, and for $500, you could buy a baritone guitar, and you could be tuned down to whatever the hell you want to be. And that's great, right? Because now you have a different spectrum of notes that you could use to create your sound or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But doing that when Winter did it in 1989, tuning your standard guitar down and doing it, you could not get strings. You had a lot of other limitations. Everything from scale length, string tension, how are you going to intonate it? Are you going to be able to slide the saddles back far enough so that you can intonate the guitar in that low tuning, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a guitar. Now let's take a bass, even more complicated, right? Right. So the guitars were started out. The one that you see on the Goden page, the one that's like a skull guitar, the one that Jimmy DiResta made. That was a standard guitar. To get that guitar down to A, I can't think it was like 25-inch scale. To get that down to A literally meant I took the saddle out, put it on a grinding wheel, grinded down the bottom so that I could slide the saddles back far enough so that the string length would be long enough, because otherwise it would hit the Floyd Rose, the back of it, right? If you have the saddle slides back, the pin, you have to be able to get that pin back to a certain point to do that. Okay, so now you slide it back and you're right thing. But it's still like playing a fucking rubber band. So now what am I going to do? Oh, I need a bigger string to get the tension to be the right thing. Now the string won't fit inside where you have to clamp down the string. Right? Now I slid the saddle back, but now I can't fit a big string in there. So now I'm taking the saddle out. I'm filing it just enough so the string fits in there. Okay, fine. So that was some of the things that, lessons I learned from doing that. Then I have John playing bass in Winter. He likes playing a Rickenbacker. A Rickenbacker is basically a short scale bass. What is it, 30 inches?
Right. Yeah.
I have baritone guitars that are 30 inches that are longer than a Rickenbacker. But John loves the Rickenbacker. It sounds good with the chords. It was like part of his sound. It was like what he liked. He loves Lemmy. He likes that distorted sound. He wants to play bar chords. He wants to play the bass like a guitar at times. But it certainly was far from the right instrument to be tuning down because of the scale length. I mean, dude, we were filing the nut out so big that it would snap in half, and then you could put in this big string that looked like it belonged on a low note of a piano. So now you have these big strings. Yeah, you get into it, but now you can't play anything that's that's fast, right? Because even though you got these tremendous strings on it, the strings are still, they have to oscillate at a certain amount so that they could produce the note.
Right, exactly.
But
Yeah.
this wave of this oscillation of the string is big, because the note, like when you hit a low note on a piano and you look at the string, the way it oscillates versus hitting a high note. So now you have this oscillation, and so now you have this thing like, okay, I can't slam on the guitar like punk rock, because now it's going to start fretting out. And I don't want the strings to be like a bow and arrow where they're like, a quarter of an inch above the fretboard, because then it fucking sucks to play. So you had a lot of these different issues. That being said, we did it. It was experimental, and we spent a lot of time doing that. And that happened between 1988 and 1990 when we were doing that. We had some guidance with Lou Porsey helped us out, and Joe Domjam helped us out. They were some guitar techs that were older than us at the time, and they understood our vision. And being an A at that time period was not as easy as it sounded, because there were no guitar strings that I needed then. So I had to use bass strings and then all the other things we spoke about.
Well, back in the late 80s, I don't remember anything ever being tuned to A, man. That's the craziest thing about it, is like, I mean, back then it was like a lot of people were just in E standard, and Sabbath was tuned lower, but like A was like this like complete frontier of sound, really,
It was a problem for the actual equipment as well too. So it was a big deal to do that, but I knew that it would make it sound different. I totally knew it would make it sound different. And me and John would fuck around with it for hours, like tuning it down and all kinds of stuff. Ultimately, we realized that a regular standard Marshall 412 cabinet was not going to work for tuning down like that, especially for what we were trying to do. So next thing I know, I'm plugging into Marshall double 15 cabinets. They used to make a cabinet, I think Lemmy used to use it. It was like a double 15 that had a Celestian speaker in it. It was a 250 watt Celestian speaker. I saw that cabinet in Sam Ash, and I said, that's the cabinet I need. A Celestian, a 250 watts. It's a 500 watt 8 ohm cabinet. I'm going to plug that into my Marshall 2210 100 watt head, and I had 2 of those. The second one was a Slave. I came out of the head. I split the return, and I used one as a power amp section. The other one was like my master head. I had 2 of those cabinets. John used what a lot of people used back then. He used Peavey. I think Pete Steele used that cabinet. It was a double 18 210 cabinet. Needed 18s to handle the bass that John was playing. He was like not working so well with the SVT cabinets. Wasn't happening what we were looking for. So the equipment had to be altered too, because now you were down at this lower register. You're playing kind of like a high end bass and a super sub bass. So the equipment had to reflect that and had to be able to resonate at those frequencies that we wanted to utilize. That became a whole nother part of the experimentation of like literally just plugging all kinds of equipment. The heads were worked. The person who worked on the heads worked for Marshall. He was the designer of the JCM 900. And I forgot his name, but he was a tech, and he helped us to supercharge the heads and work with he went into the tone controls. Ultimately, I put a parametric EQ in the effects loop. And that was basically, that really was a huge help to clean things up and make things work a little bit. So there was a lot of thought process that went into it. Today's day and age, I mean, like we just said, it's basically done for you. You just go buy a guitar and you go buy a Mesa oversized cabinet, and you're pretty good to go. And you could pretty much pull it off, and it's ready to move. You buy a bass, a 5-string bass, and you do whatever you want. You could basically tune down to that register. You could tune it down beyond that if you want now. I don't know necessarily if it makes a better song going below that. I never found any benefit going below that, especially with Goden. If I need something lower than that, Tony plays it on his Moog. Just being honest, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing I need to go below that to do that.
Yeah, that's the fascination with down tuning. I always thought I always thought D was like pretty low. You know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, D's not heavy enough. We have to go to C. You know, then it's B. Now it's A. You know, and it's like, damn. You know,
it gets negative returns. I've always felt there, and it doesn't make any musical. It starts making less musical sense when it's in A. It just feels like that's what a grand piano is, right? Like on a bass. If you're an A on a bass and you're playing grand, it's the same note at the end of the keyboard, right? So it makes some type of a musical sense being there, and it's negative returns under that. If you need to be playing a different type of instrument, I think under there. I know some folks do it, and it's cool. I hear people do it. I don't necessarily think it doesn't, just because you tune it down doesn't always make it heavier. I think the riffs you play make it heavier, and how you play them and how you execute it. But it adds a nice color to it. So those were some of my feelings. To get back to your question, I got a little sidetracked on that, but I felt a little of the past would be helpful for the future. So during that skull guitar was became an experiment. I ultimately added longer scale neck to it. And then once I started doing that, I realized that I needed to start making my own proprietary instruments. And I like the flexibility. I was already a geek. I have electronics background. I went to BOCES as a high school student, so I did like low voltage wiring and reading circuit boards and resistors. And so I was already kind of a geek at that point in time. I was a car audio installer, and I installed security and radios in cars. So I had an electronic background, so ripping pickups out and making pedal boards and opening amps up. None of that stuff really freaked me out. I used to bring them to work and leave them on the shop desk where we worked and repaired like VCRs and stuff. And I would mess with stuff and make pedal boards and make chords for everyone. And so it didn't really freak me out. So making the guitars, it just kind of fell into place. Like, a regular guitar is not going to help me for what I'm trying to do. So at that point, I started to just make my own instruments, and there were already some places that I could buy, bodies and necks and select a fret material, fretboard. I could make it active and make it inactive. I got push-pull things all over it. I could choose the radius, the bridges, and I could hot rod the Floyd. I always like Floyd Roses. I would use like Floyd upgrades and upgrade them, and it was just fun. It was like a car. You could change the carburetor, and you could soup them up, and you could do different things to it. It became more of like a hobby of just doing it, of just having fun with it and experimenting with it. And then my friends were artists, a lot of them, and two of them were furniture makers, Jimmy Mazzatelli and Jimmy DeResta, both amazing woodworkers. I said, yo, man, you want to make me some cool guitars? And it took years. They sat on their shops and whatever. We just kind of patient, and we did it. And the Goden guitars was like, that was like just a fun experiment, just to make our own headstocks and body shapes and textures on the finishes and so on. And they suited my needs. They were the proper scale for the key that I was trying to play in. And it all kind of fell into place. But now you can go buy one of those, like I said, for $500. You go buy an Ibanez and it's game over. But the fun was in the experimentation.
Now, are those all 6 strings or 7 strings?
I just use 6 strings.
Okay.
And I do play a 6-string bass when I play. I play I play a lot of Warwicks that are 5 strings, but I have a 6-string DR Hartfield that I love. Feels like a guitar. So I've been playing with that more. But yeah, 6-string guitars. I never felt the need for the extra string for me.
Yeah, we just started playing around with 7 strings and the A tuning. So I just picked up a 7-string about, I don't know, like a year ago. And
I mean, if you play a Steve Vai 7-string, it's not the right scale for the A. It's really usually what happens is, now it's different because you can get all different scale lengths and you can get the extra string. You can even get an 8-string or whatever it may be. But the earlier ones were great. They were like, it was a concept of like, well, you have a little low string like the guys in Korn use, but they weren't really designed to be in that key. They designed a guitar to be an E, and then they just have like one string that's lower. But now you have like all these different scale lengths that you could use. So experimentation, I guess, right?
Yeah, I got mine from ESP, and I told them what key we were playing in, and they sent me the guitar, and it's
Yeah, nice.
I've been enjoying it, man. It's like sometimes it only takes something different to really spark a new like strand of creativity. You know what I mean? Even if it's standard tuning but in a different key, sometimes that's enough to really just spark your creativity. You know?
Oh, totally. It's like what we were saying before. You hear something a little different, inspires you to play different, makes you feel a different kind of way, so you play it differently. Um, every time I bought a new keyboard or a new thing, it usually wrote the next 3 songs because I would hear something new in it.
Yeah,
Or
that's I love how that works with creativity, man. You just need to somehow some kind of stimulus. You just need this extra stimulus, and you don't. It's like a intangible thing almost that will catapult you into this whole other realm sometimes, and I love when that happens.
absolutely, yeah. That experimentation is part of the journey of creating. Um, it's probably the one thing that keeps me interested in music, the experimentation part of it. And and being in Tony's basement, it's it's like being in you know um like a garbage pile of like effect pedals in crates with keyboards everywhere, and it's just stuff everywhere, just of all different, like I said, from guitar equipment, bass equipment, keyboards, everything. It's just everywhere. And that kind of keeps us going. We just kind of mess around. I mean, Tony's like not even experimental, and I'm like plugging him into all kinds of other effects. And he's old school. He's like Hammond B3, and there's a couple of keyboards he likes to use, and all that other stuff he doesn't like. It's too complicated for him. So I'm like the person who comes in and is like, Tony, now play. And he's like, what the hell did you plug me into? And he just kind of goes, and it makes him play different too. He'll play some different kind of pad all of a sudden because it sounds different.
Man,
So, yeah.
that talk I had with him was like awesome, and I think that guy is like such a deep resource, such a deep pool of just knowledge and just experience, man.
Tony brings a lot to the table. Not only is he one of my oldest friends and someone I really enjoy hanging with because I learn a lot from him, but he, from a lyrical standpoint and from a musical standpoint, to create with him is fun because sometimes I'll come up with something and he'll do like some different type of interval, or I'll be like, Tony, does this really work? He goes, nah, I might like flat this whatever note here, or maybe lose the high note in the chord or whatever. And he understands how to do all that, but he also understands what I'm trying to create. And he goes, no, it needs to be a little darken it up by, make this minor or make this whatever. And that kind of is really, really helpful in the creative process. And I do now with Goden and the newer stuff. I literally try to keep the guitar stuff kind of a little bit more primitive so that it has space for him to do some other voicing over it, so that it's not completely full all the time. And because I play guitar and bass in the project, there's not like this personality thing going on where the bass player is like, I want to hear me, or the guitar is like, I want to hear me. It's like, I'm playing both of them. I'm looking for the team. What is the sonically sound for the whole project going to be, and not individual. I'm not so concerned about my one element in it because all the elements are thrown into the salad to make it. And yeah, he's a brilliant person, Tony, for sure.
We also talked about a lot of literature and stuff, and like weird fiction and Robert Bloch and Lovecraft and all that stuff. And I was like so excited to talk to someone about that because that's a huge part of like, the stuff I read and stuff I'm into is all that weird cosmic stuff, and it's just cool to talk to him about that kind of thing.
Yeah, Tony loves all that. I know you guys definitely connected on the literature and stuff. I mean, Tony's one of those people where he wants to always write better. He literally takes, I'm not sure where it is, but he goes somewhere, some university, I guess it's on Long Island. He literally takes a creative writing class, and he enjoys writing. Not everything he writes is like what he writes for God, neither.
Yeah.
I mean, he could write a story about him as a child growing up in Brooklyn and what he saw walking down the street, and it's captivating. And the way he describes, like, whatever, a guy shaving ice to make an ice cone or something like that. And he just likes to write. He likes to tell stories, and he likes to read, and that's just something that he's always been interested in. So yeah, he's certainly interesting.
Yeah, that was great, man, that conversation. So someday, if there's any plans for Goden to play live, like, you would have to actually assemble a band then.
Yeah. I mean, I already know who I would probably. I'd be most of the people that are involved in it, obviously, because
Right.
I feel that they're a part of it. Like Margaret Murphy, which is Steve Murphy from Kings of Stroy's sister. She plays violin and some cello on the record. She's invited to play, and obviously all the drummers we mentioned, Vic, Scott, Jason. I don't know how we would do that. We'd have to figure that out, but everyone would be invited to do it. As far as, I would probably play bass and guitar. I like playing both. I don't necessarily like playing guitar better than playing bass. I like both, actually. So I might play both.
So on some songs you'd be playing bass, and some songs you're playing guitar.
I think so. I love playing bass. I love just sitting back in the track and just kind of locking in with the drummer. I like that feeling. Yeah, I'd probably play both. I would have to probably choose someone that could play guitar and bass, so we could just switch rigs,
Right.
But the music's not that complicated. Music's more about a feel and an aesthetic than it is about being fretboard gymnastics. You know what I mean? So,
Because when I listen to the record, and that record is still pretty heavily rotated in my listening. Even though it came out a little while ago, it's still it's in part of I have a playlist that, on Apple Music, you put all these playlists together. There's like a playlist that features Goden, it features Winter, it features Evoken. There's like a ton of like that style in there, and then just the LP itself is something that I run still pretty regularly. So I always have it visualize what it would be like to experience that live, man. And I really do hope someday, that's something that comes into realization.
Yeah, I think it'll probably happen in like a year from now, once the world gets back in order. I think we'll definitely look forward to doing something. I love playing live, and I think everyone else does too. I know Voss certainly does. That's for sure. That's what she's been doing for the last 30 plus years.
Is she doing what's I mean, I probably should have just asked her, but like, what other stuff is she working on these days as far as music?
I mean,
she's got a killer voice, man.
Oh, Voss is awesome. She and she's one of my best friends too. I consider her one of my best friends. She has her project Hansel und Gretel, and she's been working with Loopy. Loopy and her have been working together. I mean, God, I don't even know how many records she has. She probably has over 10 records. So she's still working with Loopy, and they still do. They're currently working on their next record. They put a record out every couple of years, so she's pretty active. And usually they make a record, they tour it. They make a record, they tour it. They tour all over. They go to Russia, they go all over Europe, and yeah. So she's full time, man. She's full time musician.
That's awesome.
Nonstop. Yep, that's what she does.
One of the other aspects of just the stuff that you're doing is like lately you've become my supplement guru, as far as like what to take and what, because like any of you guys out there listening probably know me enough over the last 10 years or so that I've been doing this thing, that I'm into health and fitness and training and eating right and being healthy basically, and supplementation has always been like a huge aspect of my diet and lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. And then, but you've actually really schooled me on a lot of this stuff. So, and when I first met you, I was completely unaware that you had a background, and that's actually your life's work is doing training, like personalized training, and that whole thing. So how'd you get started in that?
So interesting. It's so weird that these two worlds collide. How can I say? Well, the two separate questions. So the supplement thing kind of started for me. I told you I worked at a my father had a cost stereo store where we installed and we did electronics.
Right.
My father passed away. We closed the business down. And I had a friend, Paige Vosper. She was in school to be a massage therapist, and she was one of my closest friends. Introduced me to my wife 25 years ago, and I was like her test dummy. And when she was working, she'd be working on me, and she'd have like her book out, and she'd be like studying the different muscles, and she was getting ready to sit for her state board and everything. And one night her neck was bothering her or something, and I was like, "Yo, let me work on you." And she's like, "Yeah, sure." I just kind of mimicked what she was doing to me for like months. And she's like, "Hey, that was pretty good. That was better than like people I'm in class with that are practicing on me." And I'm like, "It felt pretty good." And she's like, "My neck feels pretty good." I was like, "Oh, good. I'm glad I was able to help you, And during that time period, we closed my father's business, and he had passed away, and I didn't like the way the medical world had dealt with his glioblastoma brain cancer. But I was young, and I didn't know that much about medicine or what was happening, and there was no internet really to research things like there is now. I started working in a health food store, and in that health food store, I had the graveyard shift, and there were all these books on the shelf. So I would sit there and I would read the books that were there, and I started realizing that whether it was Dr. Wilde, Mercola, or whoever it might be at the time, who was Gary Knoll, those are the big guys when I was growing up. And they all had universal thoughts on supplementation. And they would all agree on certain supplements like vitamin C and zinc and your basics. But then each book would have its proprietary idea about supplementation and herbs and how to treat certain ailments. So I was working in this health food store. And whenever people would come in, the owner of the health food store, I worked in the vitamin section. If someone came in and they had some ailment, he says, "You don't prescribe anything. You're going to go over to this book." And this book was called Prescription for Natural Healing. I think they're probably on the 5th edition. I just bought the new edition literally 2 weeks ago. And I would go in there, you look up the ailment, you look for the supplement suggestions. And I started reading that book like nonstop. I was like addicted to that book. It was like calling out to me. It was like, wow, look at all these ways to naturally deal with certain things instead of taking maybe, really powerful pharmaceutical drugs. These were like natural ways to deal with things. And not only would they help you with the ailments, but they would help your overall general health. And people would come back to this health food store and say, "Hey, that thing you recommended really helped." I'm like, "Well, I didn't recommend it. It was very important that I said that. The book recommended it. So thank the book." And I started, wow, this is really cool. It feels good when someone comes back in and you're like 19 years old, and some woman who has a child that has really crazy eczema and is scratching his feet on the rug so they're bleeding now is no longer having as much of an issue, right? Felt pretty good as a 19-year-old. And I became really intrigued with that. Well, they had an open house at the Swedish Institute, and Paige, my friend, said, "You should go to the Swedish Institute. It's a school of acupuncture, herbology. I think now it's like nursing. It's exercise science. It has a lot of different health-related things." But when I went there, it was like voodoo, basically. And I attended Swedish Institute. I sat for my state board. I became an LMT. And I was always into sports, and I competed at Woodward as an athlete, which was for BMX and freestyle. And there's people from all over the country went there.
I had no idea about that.
I competed at Woodward. Yeah, I competed there for 3 summers. And I literally cut lawns and did stuff and saved money to go there, too. And I competed at Woodward, so I was always into athletics and sports and so on. And I completed that, and I wanted to go into more like post-rehabilitation. I worked at Hofstra University, and I was like the massage therapist for them for a really short period of time. I was working with some of the people there. And then I slowly started furthering my education and realized I wanted to be more in the post-rehabilitative world. And I was a massage therapist for years. It's like over 20 years now. And I shortly after that went back and did exercise science there. And then I sat for NSCA, ACSM, USAW. I became a Pilates instructor, and And I basically got knighted by everyone, because at that point in time, everyone was like, ACSM's the best, NSCA is the best. I was like, you know what? I'm knighted by all of them. So everyone just back away from me, please. So, and that started my journey into the fitness and health world. So the supplements probably started first, and then and I've been taking supplements since then, since like 1989, 90. And that started my journey into, health, fitness, and just training. And I stayed in that world, and I stayed in New York, and I practiced here mostly on the Upper East and Upper West Side of Manhattan was where I started out. And I worked for Reebok for 10 years at their flagship gym. I worked for Reebok for 10, and then I also worked at Equinox for about the same period of time before I kind of went solo and did my own thing and started my own business and LLC and started just working independently. And I became introduced to everything from Olympic lifting to, kettlebells and all kinds of other stuff when I was, back then, I don't even know what a kettlebell was. So
yeah, this is but the only people who knew about it were the Russians, really. That was way, way back before anyone knew that stuff.
It's funny, when I worked at Reebok, I can't remember his name, but there was a couple of guys who were Russian, and that's how I became kind of influenced by it. And I had just been my neurology teacher was also big into kettlebells for neurological training, and he was a big believer in it. And I needed CEUs, so I did one of his kettlebell courses. And the Russian guys that were at Reebok one day were making fun of me. I'm like, dude, why are you laughing at me? I don't understand. I do kettlebells like you. And like, you lift like an American. And I was like, huh? I'm like, dude, it's hip extension, man. It's not hip flexion. You're backwards. And I'm like, ah. And then they started, one of the girls there, Kinga, was, she started training with these Russian guys, and she was going to do the Girovo sport. Where you could do like 1 million swings in like a minute, whatever it is.
Oh, wow.
And she was a monster, Kinga. And I started training with those guys. I got really into the kettlebells, big time into kettlebells. All I could do for like years was kettlebell. I was getting on the subway with my kettlebells, bringing them to my clients, houses. And they were like, what is this weight? They were like, why can't I do this with like a dumbbell? And I had gotten really involved in the kettlebells, and, Pavel and some of the earlier people, had all their videos, and I was entrenched in this kettlebell thing.
Oh yeah, Pavel Tatsulin. I have his that book he did, the Power to the People, about it's
unbelievable book.
Great
yeah,
book.
Totally.
And real quick about neurology and the kettlebell, that's interesting, man, because anyone out there who's not familiar with what that type of training is, there's the link between your brain and your body is something I think that gets overlooked, and essentially a kettlebell training is a compound movement where you're utilizing different. It's not just like you're doing curls or benching or something like that. Even though benching engages a lot of stuff too. But now, neurologically, what are some of the benefits of that?
Well, one of the reasons I always love kettlebells, I like them for two different reasons. So I was into the Olympic lifting, right? I'm USAW certified and so on. One of the things that I started to realize was I like the explosive nature and explosive trainingness of kettlebells, right? You could do cleans, clean jerks, snatches, right? Or you could do all your Olympic lifts,
right,
which I was doing with an Olympic bar. But the problem was I was already in like my 30s at that point, right? So I started to realize that Olympic bar was, having it overhead and snapping it up overhead. I started to develop an injury in my shoulder, right? So you have this thing where you're locking your upper body, both hands to a bar. You're cleaning it, you're jerking it, you're snatching it, you're throwing it up over your head. And I have a little bit of scoliosis where my spine is like a little bit off. So now you have something where you're bilaterally locking your hands to a bar and you're throwing it over your head. But you're having asymmetric weight shift. because you have scoliosis. So one shoulder is a little higher than the other. So your alignment is a little bit off, but now you're locking the upper body to a bar. So if you're doing a lot of that, now you have like my right shoulder was getting tweaked, right? The humerus was hitting like the acromial space, and it was rubbing on the bone, right? Because now you're doing this repetitive movement, right? And you're doing it under heavy load,
Right?
It's explosive. So you're creating a lot of torque on the joint. So one of my friend, Dr. Scott Weiss, at Bodie's Own, he looked at the MRI and he looked at me straight in the face. He goes, Steph, you can't keep doing this. They can go in there and they could literally file down where you're getting this osteoclast, where the bone kind of builds, it's clastoblast, where it builds up the bone in the area. Like, like the Thai guys hit their shins, so they make their shins stronger.
Yeah. The
calcification. So you now have this like little calcification in there. And he goes, you have two choices. You could either go in there, you can let them file it down and go in there, or you could stop doing this explosive movement overhead where the joint is rubbing. And I was starting to get numbness in my median nerve fingers, which is thumb, index finger, middle finger, where it was getting numb. I couldn't play guitar. I couldn't feel my fingers on the strings. And I was like, oh, come on, Dr. Weiss. I love doing the Olympic lifts. He goes, dude, do the kettlebells. So I started thinking about what he said, and we spoke about it. And here's why I like the kettlebells better than an Olympic weight. And this is why I totally embrace the kettlebells. It's unilaterally loading. So your upper body is able to move independently of each other. And your brain has this extra little stimulus because you have two different masses that you're moving in the air, but they're not locked in the center, the bar. So you're doing a clean or a jerk or a snatch, but you're doing it independently of each other. And then I started realizing, like, oh, I don't need to have a pallet where I got to throw the weight on the floor. I don't have to have this big bar. I don't have to have these weights. I can have a bunch of kettlebells that are underneath my bed. I could do my workout in the morning. I could do clean snatches, jerks, Turkish get-ups, all like the basics, right? And now my shoulder wasn't bothering me, because when you lock your hands to a bar, right, and you're tucking the thumb and you're holding the thumb, your hand is locked to that. There is no internal, external rotation happening on the limbs. But with a kettlebell, you have the flexibility when you're cleaning and jerking to let the arm internally, externally rotate. That was just enough freedom for me, not for my injury, to completely dissipate and not be a problem. So the principles of Olympic lifting, I believe in, for growth hormone and, fast twitch fibers and all the things that go along with explosive training, right? It's completely different than endurance training. But now I didn't have the limitations. Plus, I had something I could take on the subway with me and make money with and bring to my clients, and have a new modality and do power training with people with a two bowling ball style looking weights. So I completely indoctrinated it into my regime when I would be training people. It had a big learning curve. It wasn't for everyone, but it was completely functional. So now you had, if you're doing something that's unilaterally weighted, if you're using the right side, the left side is contracting to stabilize you when you're moving. How is that? Why is that so important? Well, for everything. If let's take, I know you're a martial arts person, you need to do high intensity training. You're going to do a 3-minute bout, whether you're a boxer, a fighter, whatever it is. It's pretty fucking high intensity.
Yes.
You need to get in there and you got to move quickly, explosively. You got to be focused. That's what kettlebells were to me. I'm not a fighter, but I love that feeling. I love that feeling of doing something hard for short bouts and to really get that benefit of stimulating growth hormone. That was like nature's like fountain of youth in some ways. Because, over 40, 50, growth hormone really drops off big time. One of the natural ways to do it is to stimulate it, is to do explosive sports. It doesn't have to be a kettlebell. It could be sprinting. That's why the Olympic lifting formula works. It's about utilizing those systems and using weights to stimulate those systems. So kettlebell became like my favorite, one of my favorite tools. And functional training, if you have fighters and elite athletes, yes, kettlebell is great. But some of these principles still apply for older population, right? They might not necessarily be an athlete. They still need to have good balance and to train functionally. Functionally meaning they could stand on one leg and do a bicep curl overhead press, or they could lean down on one leg and do an arabesque and clean jerk a kettlebell overhead on one leg. So that's functional. Like, that's teaching you how to have balance. That's teaching your neurological system that I need to balance on one leg while on the right leg while I'm clean and jerking with the right hand. Then the next set could be standing on the right leg with the other hand, because now you have a diagonal pattern going across your core. So I started realizing the flexibility of using these different modalities. Kettlebell wasn't my only. I mean, I like BOSUs, I like physio balls. I mean, all these apparatuses are things that teach us to be more functional. So if I was training some guy who's 60 years old, 60 through 70, I could still do functional training with them the same way I could do functional training with someone who's an athlete. Obviously, I have to change things quite a bit, loading and so on. And that was kind of how I started getting into the functional training. I just felt everyone needed it. I used it as well. I recently got involved in the blood flow restriction as well, which I felt piggybacked on top of all that earlier education that I had, and added like a whole new kind of like thought process of how we look at some of those things. It became like the biohacking of lifting, and now it's becoming really popular. So
what's this blood flow restriction stuff? I'm not that familiar with that.
So I was really fortunate. I had a chiropractor, Dr. Gilbert, who introduced me to Barry Hayden. I think Barry Hayden was like the New York Mets. It might have been the Mets or the Yankees. It was one of them. He was a pitching coach. And there was a method called Katsu. Katsu was developed over 40 years ago by Dr. Sato. And what he had realized 40 years ago, when he was at, I guess it was like a traditional Japanese wake, he was sitting on his feet. You know, you have no shoes on. You do that in martial arts too, right? When you're first starting out, you get centered. And he realized that his feet were falling apart, but he realized his calves were really pumped up, as if he had a big workout. Well, Dr. Sato was into sports and athletics, and he was actually a lifter, but he was also a medical doctor in Japan. And he says, wow, what is causing this? I'm having this hypertrophy in my calves. Well, long story short, he designed a machine that would restrict blood flow. There were these cuffs that he put on the upper limbs, right above your bicep, below your deltoid, in that little nook, and also on the lower body too, above the quadricep. And the machine would apply pressure, and that pressure would restrict blood flow, not occlude it, not cut it off, but slow it down. But as his research went on, remember, this took 40 years before it made its way over to this country. Kept it in his own wheelhouse in Japan for a while, did tons of research, and he started to realize a couple of really interesting things about restricting this blood flow. When you restrict this blood flow, without getting too sciencey, there's like the lack of oxygen. When you have this like compression around the limbs, you have this like lack of, the blood starts to pool, there's a lack of oxygen, and the body starts to like almost like dilate, and the pituitary sees almost as if there's like gets stimulated, and it starts to produce like growth hormone.
Oh, wow.
And these anabolic hormones because the body almost sees it as like a stressor, but It's not really a stressor, because the blood flow is being slowed down, and the epithelial and things start to change as if, and the body sees it as a stressor. And he started to realize that when you put these bands on, you cannot lift a lot of weight. Like if you're lifting say you had two 10-pound dumbbells, you put these cuffs on, that feels like you're lifting probably two 40-pound dumbbells.
Really? Wow.
And you're like, oh my God, I can't do these bicep curls. And you have these things, and all of a sudden you start to look like the Hulk, and your muscles, the blood starts to pool, all the veins are popping out, and you go and you do your workout. But Dr. Sato started to realize that not only was there a pump going on, but there were these other elements that were starting to happen in the body. This pituitary stimulation that produced these elements, and the loads were really light, and they helped release the growth hormone. They increased hypertrophy, but they were really light. So you feel like you're having the craziest workout ever, but you're not really. But your brain thinks it is, and it's producing these hormones. So Dr. Sato really thought, he goes, wait a minute, what if I use this in a rehabilitative environment? Say you have someone who just blew their knee out, okay? And they have a knee surgery. One of the main parts of the recovery is they need to redevelop those quadriceps because they've been sitting for a while, right?
Atrophy, yep.
The atrophy starts to set in. But you can't load these people with a lot of weight because they just have an injury, right? So you're to catch-22. So that rehab has to be stretched out over weeks or a month or whatever it may be. But now you put these cuffs on the limb, and you get this hypertrophy, and you're making them, say, do a leg extension, right, with a cuff on. You have this hypertrophy. You're stimulating growth hormone and repair mechanisms in the blood, right? Because that's what happens, right? You do a heavy workout, the body senses that, the sensing mechanisms in your body sense this, and they send growth hormone, they send repair mechenisms, but you're kind of hacking it with these bands, right? You think the body thinks it's,
man. Like I wish I'd have known that when I had my knee injuries, because it took me like a really long time to build up the atrophied muscles, my hamstrings and glutes and all that stuff, and and calf and all that. That would have been a great way to help recover that.
Well, you'll do it now. And you know what? Here's the best thing about it. You could do that literally till you're like 80 years old. And here's why. The loads are light. You will never get hurt doing a 10-pound, say, bicep curl overhead press. We'll keep it simple, right? Won't get too complicated with the movement pattern, right? But it's like you're doing 40 pounds. Now, if you were to do the, 2 double-handed bicep curl overhead presses, right, and you were to do that all the time, you might start getting, certain tendinitis type of things, but you're not getting any of those issues because you're using a very light load, but you're stimulating all these healing processes, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So what happened was, and the Katsu machine back then was a couple of $1,000. So one of my clients introduced me to Barry Hayden. Barry had gone to Japan at some point and studied with Dr. Sato and brought it back with him. And he started doing this. He has a gym in his home up in Harlem. I went up and I started studying with him. And I was like, these bands are fascinating. I mean, I'm like, Barry, this is the coolest stuff I think I've ever seen. Barry was totally cutting edge. I was learning all kinds of stuff from him. And he had the Katsu machine, and it was so expensive, a couple of $1,000 to throw at something like that. That's not really going to be mainstream. And it's hard to explain the mechanism of how all this worked. And even though it had 40 years of research behind it, it was a hard thing to bring to the mainstream. And that was really what Barry wanted to do with a doctor named Dr. Gunderson, Jim Gunderson. And they started a company called Be Strong, which were these bands that you could put on your upper and lower limbs. It had almost like a bicycle tube, but it had like little spaces that would not occlude the blood. It was not a medical tourniquet where it was occluding blood, which is what a lot of people misunderstand the method.
Right.
And they try to occlude blood. You do not want to occlude blood. You want to slow down venous return.
Yeah. Okay.
And arterial flow.
Yeah.
You want to restrict it. You don't want to occlude it. So they developed these bands where it looked like a blood pressure cuff where you squeeze it and you could put the amount of mercury in and the amount of pounds. So it could be very specific with how much area and how much occlusion you were doing. And I worked with Barry for a while, and I learned the method. I started doing myself. I purchased those bands, and those were like $300 and maybe $350 or something. You make your own custom bands, not really something you want to share with people because you're sweating all over it.
Right.
And then, I guess like within the last 2 years, Dr. Gunderson had a certification thing where you can be certified in. I never really wanted to train too many of my clients because I wasn't really certified. I didn't know if I could be, flyability would be like, I wasn't really certified in this method. So I studied with Dr. Gunderson, did his certification, and then I went full force with the blood flow restriction, Katsu, or whoever you want to give the credit to. I give it to Katsu because Dr. Sato invented it. So that was how I kind of got into the blood flow modification. Now, you could do everything we just spoke about, functional training, lifting, all these different methods with these cups on that you've been traditionally doing, and you can reap all the benefits from a rehabilitative to physical fitness to competitive. There was one other element I left out that's really important to understand. When you do explosive training, like sprinting or lifting, you're activating fast twitch fibers. You're recruiting them. That's usually what fits into that muscle fiber system. Then you have slow twitch. That's like your endurance athlete. Usually you have to recruit all slow twitch fibers before fast twitch become engaged. With Katsu, because you're stimulating this hormonal response, pituitary growth hormone, all these things, because it's happening, it stimulates the fast twitch, but it stimulates fast twitch under a low load, which is an unbelievable thing when you think about it, right? You're literally stimulating fast twitch fibers. If you're over 60 years old or you're a senior citizen, you're never going to recruit fast twitch fibers. You can't do anything really with them to stimulate it.
Wow.
With them.
Okay. Yeah, I see the point of all this. Yeah, definitely.
You understand what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
So from a longevity standpoint, for an older person, 60 years old or older, or maybe even 50, depending on what their fitness level is, they might not be able to do exercises that are going to get them to maybe heart rates that are like, 90%, or which would get you there, or lift loads high enough to get you there. But with this restriction of this with the blood flow and oxygen, it goes directly there. The muscles think that it's under a massive stressor when it's not really under a massive stressor. It's under a restriction of blood flow. So that is probably one of the most beautiful things about Katsu and blood flow restriction. I'm trying to, without getting into too many details about it, that kind of is how I got into blood flow restriction.
Yeah, no, I'd never really heard of that, and that's I've heard the term thrown around, but I never really understood what it was because I'm always interested in doing new things like that, physical training and all that, and yeah, it sounds cool, man. I mean, I recovered. Well, I'm pretty much recovered already, but yeah, I've always got like little injuries and stuff, and my biggest fear is like atrophy, and like I've sprained my ankle recently. I mean, I'm fine now, but there was like a period of time for like a month where I wasn't able to really do any kind of explosive training or anything like that, or Muay Thai or any of that stuff.
Sure, this would be a great modality for you in the future, and for your overall fitness.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? Dude, it's the growth hormone for people 50 plus is like the fountain of youth. So to have something that's non-destructive like this, that's non-loading, to be able to do that, that's pretty powerful, very powerful.
Yeah, I used to not do a whole lot of strength training, but in the last, since the beginning of the summer, I really went back to the basics for like, 3 days a week. I'm doing deadlifts, squats, and bench pressing, and just basic stuff. Like I have like maybe like a 40-minute weight training workout that I do 3 days a week. And then the rest of my time, the rest of my exercise time is done with martial arts like Muay Thai and boxing and stuff like that.
It's a beautiful combination.
3 days is a nice amount because and I actually noticed just the little bit of weight training for a couple of months like really made a huge difference, even just in my endurance.
Of course, you're having the hypertrophy, you're having all the circulatory stuff that happens, you're having growth hormone secretion, nitric oxide stuff that's happening in the body. I mean, I think lifting is important. I personally do it a couple of times a week. I do intervals. I'm a big cycling interval kind of person. I don't really do too much impact interval stuff. And if I do plyometrics, it's only usually just up, not really down, like I'm jumping up on boxes and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's great. I mean, for rehabilitative stuff, because I'm also in the rehabilitative world as well as a massage therapist, I also started having problems with my hands from 20 years, all my joints and stuff.
Yeah.
And like my hands were like starting to fall apart. And, also from a musician, I was having a problem too, right? You do 7 hours a day of like massage work. You come home, you go to pick up a coffee cup, and you're like, my hands are tired.
Sure.
So I started getting really involved in the high-speed vibration therapy, and that became like a lifesaver for me as well too, especially when I was working on bigger folks. So I got involved with the rapid release technologies. I met one of them at, I guess it was like an anti-aging conference. It was maybe was it Jacob Javis? I can't remember which one it was, but I became introduced to them, and I started using the high-speed vibration therapy. So all the hands-on muscle stripping and techniques I was using to separate fibers and stuff manually with my hands started going a little bit into a different place. I started using this machine that was tuned to a certain frequency and vibrate extremely fast. With the head of this machine was very small, but it was very fast. And I think it was actually FDA approved device that actually breaks up scar tissue. So if you had like, say, an injury like shin splints, plantar fasciitis, or injuries where it's like usually about like, where it's like a fascia, muscle fiber kind of getting a little stuck together and just needed to be kind of separated, this machine was like my go-to. And I started using that with all my people that had everything from carpal tunnel, tennis elbow, and stuff, because it actually feels pretty good while you're working on it. And it vibrates that frequency, and it just helps those fibers to separate. And then I also got involved. I know you see a lot of the trainers now, they use the Volt machine.
Yeah, yep. Volt's
really popular as well. That's not the same thing. So I use that as well, but it has a different purpose. So that machine, the head of that leg literally moves like 10 millimeters. I think the black one goes maybe 11 or 12. It goes a little bit deeper. But that's actually a pretty big depth, because you could also lean into the machine as well too.
Yeah.
That'll help with circulation and help break some stuff up. But for literally breaking up scar tissue and fascia type issues, the RRT, rapid release technology machine, is something that is like, whenever I go do a massage appointment, I bring those two machines with me, and those are definitely in my toolbox. So those were other technologies that I incorporated, just because I'm a geek. So
I mean, dude, you're a fucking Renaissance man.
I try to do a little. Listen, I love what I do, and I'm always trying to keep it interesting. And after 20 years of doing massage and training, I mean, I've seen a lot of things come and go, and I feel like I never find that one thing's better than the other. You just take elements of different methods and you incorporate them all, and you just use what's right for the different people that you're with. You have to be flexible with different types of populations. Elderly populations. A lot of the younger coaches and trainers, they don't want to work with the elderly folks. And I'm like, why not? Like, because it's so boring. You can't do anything. I go, but it's not about you. This is about them. They're paying you. You should be excited for that 70-year-old that couldn't get off the toilet, but now can, because they have quadriceps and they can stand up without rocking themselves forward and coming off the toilet. To them, that's pretty exciting. And by the way, that person will send you to every single person they know when you help them with their daily life activities. You don't think they're going to tell their daughter or their grandchildren or or anyone else. So every time you create some type of positive lifestyle change for someone, that's your advertising right there. So I always try to look for different methods to incorporate. So I work with them all. I actually like the older population. And the older population, folks, they're retired. They could train with you in the middle of the day when all your working folks can't.
That's true. Yeah. Yep. They have
You're
flexibility.
working. They have flexibility. All my older folks, listen, I'm busy from basically 5:30 a.m. through 11. I get a couple of the housewives around 11. They do Pilates with me or whatever. But my retired folks, they're like, what time do you want to come? I'm like, I don't know. How's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 through 4 o'clock? Sure, come whenever you want. If you're going to be a full-time trainer or massage therapist, those hours in the day are very valuable to you. Otherwise, you're going to be working from 5 a.m. till like maybe 10, and then you're not going to work again from 5 till 8 o'clock at night. That's a pretty
low. Cram in all those people in that window of the evening, you know.
Yep, and you'll have a different, and you'll break it down a little bit differently. So I like those populations, and those people are really grateful when you work with them too, because for them it's not about necessarily being stronger or faster, but being functional is really important to them. Being able to bend down and pick up the paper without their back going out might be a little important to someone who's 70. Or being able to get in and out of their car without their knee bothering them, or whatever it may be. I mean, these issues go on all the time. Yeah, everyone has some kind of weak link or injury or something, so you have to kind of be able to work around them. So those are my workarounds, and those are some of my thoughts on some of the newer things that are out there, and older things too. All the old stuff works too.
Well, Steph, it was great catching up with you, man. And man, this is a pretty epic discussion we had, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great geeking out with you about some of this stuff.
Hell yeah, man. I think I owed an epic episode like this to the listeners, man. So this was great.
Excellent. Mike, I love talking to you. Always a pleasure. We'll have to catch up for a drink or something in the near future.
Right on, man. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll talk to you next week.